Hello everybody. In this video, I'm going to be talking about causation, explicit memory usage, and also the nature versus nurture debate. And well, I'm going to be embodying a couple of different topics, and let's just see how this video kind of takes off and goes. So the first thing is the difference between causation and causation, right? So we can differentiate because causation is that which causes something to be, right? If we think in terms of, I don't know, if you heat water at certain degrees, it boils, right? That's a direct cause and effect. I don't want to say correlation, but that's a cause and effect relationship, right? Directly. Now, causality means it's just like casual, right? Causality. In this case, this is something that is not directly affecting something else, but it's related, right? And this has to do again with the topic of heuristics. I've been really like thinking about heuristics a lot. And I'm going to be making a video next after this one talking specifically about conditionals and hypotheticals. And I may even get into the idea and the notion of behaviorism from Skinner and Watson to kind of like, you know, the conditional operant and classical conditioning, which basically talks about how you get people to do things through either punishments, rewards, or as Jordan Peterson said, through the promise of a punishment or the promise of a reward, right? Threatening someone or promising someone something. So the idea here that I want to just basically say is that in order to get to causation, which is the cause and effect relationship, first you need to use heuristics. Heuristics, like I've mentioned, are mental shortcuts. A typical example is the ice cream sales, right? People say, well, I don't know, in summer, ice cream sales go up and more people swim. So the heuristics or the correlation there is that when there's more ice cream to be sold, more people will swim, right? And that may seem logical, but it's actually not. It's a fallacy because you're not considering temperature, right? For instance, so temperature rises and that makes sales, ice cream sales increase, right? And that's the causation. The other thing is just causality, right? Or correlations, right? Correlations that you view. And a lot of people will discard things that they don't know. But the idea here is that how are you going to get to the things that you know if you don't first think about imaginary correlations, right? Now, I'm not saying that all of them aren't wrong because most of them are, right? Like whenever you're trying to do correlations, most of them are wrong. People will tell you, no, heuristics is wrong. You can't really just go around life associating things that actually have no logical connection. And I agree because I see this a lot with people, right? Like whenever they talk about, I don't know, the economy or you need to vote because it matters or things like that, right? And I say all of that is just heuristics. It's phallatic or it's logical that it's logic that's fallacy, right? They're fallacies. Well, in my perspective. But I'm going to get into that in another video too, where I'm going to talk about something that Andrew Bustamante said in regards to voting. It's going to be very interesting. Well, anyway, so my idea here is that you first need to start somewhere. So it's okay to use heuristics, correlations in order to get to causation, right? Where you actually detect what causes something, right? So the idea here is basically first you need to imagine, right? Use conditionals and hypotheticals like if this happens, maybe it's because of this, right? Maybe you're not going to be so certain as to say if this happens, it's because of this, but if this happens, it may be, right? Or it can be because of this. And you're using more than the zero conditional, the first conditional, right? To imagine, to make a hypothesis, to come up with a hypothesis, right? To theorize, and even though you may be wrong, eventually, you're going to get things right, right? So that's the idea there. Now, another thing I want to talk about, and this is going to get into explicit memory, is I was just thinking last week, like, everybody always wants to know why something. Like, whenever you mention any, excuse me, any type of idea about something, humans have a necessity to know why, right? To know the cause. Again, with the cause and effect, they need to know the causality, right? The causation, sorry. They need to know why something happens. Okay, you're telling me this is the way it is, this is the idea, this is the concept, this happened, this is the result, the consequence, whatever the effect. Why? Explain to me why this happened. How did this happen, right? The process or the reason. Now, the human brain has two memories, and I love talking about memory. We have implicit memory, which is in some type of way procedural, right? It's unconscious. It's basically like how you know how to walk, breathe, blink, right? How you know how to talk, how like all of these things, how to ride a bike, if you know how to ride a bike, how to drive. You don't have to think about these things, right? So implicit memory are like all of the automatic things you already know how to do. That's one type of memory. The other type of memory is called explicit memory. And explicit memory is just that. It needs to be explained, right? Explicit. So in explicit memory, you have two types of memory, sub-memories. One of them is called conceptual or semantic, which I think this is more of my terrain, and a lot of philosophers work in the conceptual semantic, which we can summarize it as knowing what, right? So if I tell you this is a table, and you get the idea, or if I talk about justice, justice isn't for everybody, or like a lot of people have conceptual ideas about like what the economy is, what democracy is, right? These are just semantic conceptual things, right? If I tell you the word, I don't know, the word hydration, what does hydration mean, right? And you have a concept of what that is: family, mother, father, right? These are conceptual things. This is why you go to school, to learn about conceptual things, right? To learn concepts, to learn the meaning of things, semantics, right? Now, the other type of explicit memory is called narrative or episodic, right? And this is like telling a story. This is when you need to give examples. And I think more people, when they're learning something, operate more with the explicit narrative episodic memory. They need to be given examples. So I can't just tell you like, I don't know, the idea of investment, right? Investment is defined as blah, blah, blah. I can't just give you the concept, because I need to give you examples. I need to tell you a story. Because you need to understand how and why things are the way they are, right? So you can think of the conceptual semantic memory as the what, and then the narrative episodic memory, more organized, more this and then this and then this happened, as the how. And you're going to understand the why through it, right? We could have a debate here and maybe say, well, what about when you define a topic? The definition of a topic, economy is the blah, 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 blah. When you define a topic, you're also using narrative episodic memory, aren't you? Because you're telling a story. A definition is not just the idea economy. It's, the words, the definition, which we all know is a general idea in a specific idea, right? Like economy is the study, right? There are a lot of studies. Economy is the study of the demands of the exchanges of goods and services in society, or in a country, or in the world, right? So you're being specific about what it does. It's the study of the exchange of goods and services in a country, for example, right? That's a definition, but that's also a story, right? We could get into it. And the narrative episodic explicit memory carries meaning, because it's answering why, right? It's answering the cause of something. Now, I said semantic also had meaning, which it could have, but I think the meaning you give it, you yourself give it, right? Like if I give you a concept and you get it right away, it's because you yourself have given it meaning. If I give you a concept and you don't get it and I need to explain more and I need to give you examples, it's because you don't have those schemas in your head, right? So I need to provide those schemas for you. Which again, this could be, the difference between people that have a tendency to think for themselves and people that basically don't think for themselves and want other people to think for them and then just feed them, right? Baby feed them the information and then they don't have to think for themselves at the end of the day, right? Because that's ultimately what that means. So if it carries meaning, right, in narrative and episodic, then you know why and how something is done and not just what it is, right? Not just the conceptual semantic part. And of course, this is more for learning, right? When you're trying to learn things, how to tie your shoes, how to ride a bike, how to do your taxes, right? Or how to do anything, how to problem solve, right? You need to investigate and then do it, which could be related with the incubation process. Go check out that video. So what is the end goal of humanity in this case? Because we could say, well, it is to learn. And I just kind of wanted to add this in there because I've spoken on this before, but I didn't give you all of the information. And here is all of the ideas out there that I've so far been able to document or list that have to do with the end goal of humanity, right? Which is one of the philosophical questions. What is the end goal of humanity? What is the objective? What are we here for, right? Why are we here for, right? So the first one is which a lot of esoteric schools say this, to become one with the all. We are all one, and I've said this before, we are all one, and you need to realize you're all one, right? And almost like you're God and everybody's God, and become one with the all, right? That's one of them. That's the first one. The second one is to seek truth, right? Which I think is the most basic, banal, vulgar way of basically summarizing the human experience. The objective is truth. It's like, what even is truth, right? Okay, but anyway, that's the second one. The third one, also very generic, love. The end is love, right? It's just to seek love and be loved, right? The fourth one is, and these are kind of like, I guess you could say I've been through these, the process in and of itself, right? The objective is just to be in the moment, to be living the process, and that is the end goal, right? Like the means, just being in the means, right? Not so much getting somewhere, but just being in the process, right? The next one is permanent progress and growth, which could tie into learning. Like the end goal of life is just for you to be learning all the time, learning permanently until you die, growing until you die, making progress until you die, right? The next one is to simply survive and procreate, to make sure that the human species is not extinguished, right? And the last one, which is kind of where I'm at, is just being. Being can kind of be tied into being in the process in and of itself, but being in the process, you're aware you're in the process, and being, you're trying not to be aware, you're just kind of being, right? Existing, we could say. Okay, and to finish off this video, I wanted to talk about what makes you you, the nature versus nurture debate. Now, this debate we know depends on what perspective you have of human development, how it is you grow, how it is you evolve, how it is you develop, whether physically, socially, mentally, spiritually, whatever. And some theorists say that it's nature, that it depends on your genetic, your biology, right? Like the reason why you have black hair, or your face is a certain way, or you're a certain height, right? Or weight or whatever. But other people say it's nurture. It's the social context in which you are exposed to. It's your family, your friends, the people you know in your life, the culture you're raised in, right? And of course, people will say, well, it's a little bit of both. And then there are the real people, the real scientists that will take sides, right? And I've spoken on this a lot. So that's not what I'm here to talk about to finish up this video. What I want to mention regarding this is that there are two other ideas here which could interfere. One of them is free will, free agency, right? Freedom, the freedom of choice, the freedom of decision making. You can choose, right? You're conscious and you can choose. Now, is that dependent on your culture or on your genetics? It may be. Or maybe you're just dependent all the time, and what you really think is free will is nothing more than just like the conditions of either your biology or your context, right? But let's just say it does exist. You are free to choose whatever you want to do, which is religiously speaking would make sense. And that would answer the question why there's so much evil in the world, right? Because people have free will and they can choose to be bad, right? Now, again, would that depend on their situation or on their biology? That's another topic. But free will would be like the third point there. And the other point would be fate, destiny, or God's will, which I've spoken about in a previous video. And I mentioned how you need to connect with being, right? With destiny, not with being, with destiny. And you need to figure out what your destiny is and just kind of go along with it to live a good life. So the idea here, the question I want to ask is, how is it that you learn, and how much of what your parents explicitly or implicitly taught you has stayed with you? Explicitly are the things that they said for you to do, and implicitly are like the things that you observed them do and then you do later on in life, which I find that to be fascinating because, how is it that, years or decades after you live with your parents, and you're on your own, and you have gone through so much of your life without acting or thinking like your parents. You know how they say, like, I become my mom, or I eventually become my father, right? Because, how does that happen? Why doesn't it happen like right when you're there, right? As a kid or as a teenager, and you live like your 20s away from your family or whatever, and you're not really like them until later on in life. And that's just kind of weird. And maybe because of the implicit memory that's just stuck with you. And finally, morality, and I've spoken on this before too, morality causes resentment and feeds your ego, right? And this is a correlation I'm going to make, very important, between ego and morality. Your ego, and this comes from a question that I saw online on Facebook, I think, and people were asking, what is your ego? And there's this negative idea right now about ego. Ego is bad. You need to get rid of your ego. Your ego limits you. And it's like, yes, and for a good reason, because otherwise you would be animalistic, primitive, right? You would be whole, yes, but being whole also means being unconscious, right? So your ego is the conscious mediator between what is known and unknown, right? And basically, the reason it exists is because of morality, right? It's because, I'm going to get into this in another video, but it's because you're able to use hypotheticals and conditionals, right? If I steal money and I get caught, I will be arrested, right? You can think of the consequences, right? With conditionals, imaginary thoughts. So you're able to limit your actions. Thus, your ego is the mask that people see. And a lot of people think that's a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing you have an ego, right? And of course you have a pure you, but you also need to give a face to society, because society, and especially nowadays, does not work by being yourself, right? You have to put on a face, you have to put on a mask. You need an ego, which is fed by morality, right? By what's good, what's deemed good or bad, what society considers to be good or bad, right? Because if you didn't have an ego, then you would always be in the unknown, you would be unconscious, and you would be like an animal, because that's what you are at the end of the day, right? So people think about getting rid of your ego and achieving this higher truth, this higher purpose, becoming one with the all and being all love. When in reality, if you were just back to the unconscious, back to death, before you were born and after you die, right? Where you come from, where you're going, that would just be basically your primitive state, right? Your animalistic, your id, right? According to Sigmund Freud. So your ego morality limits who you are, and with good reason, right? However, without morality, without your ego, you would be whole, but that whole wouldn't be the romantic whole that we all think we would be, right? Or that esoteric schools tell us we would be. You would actually just be like an animal, like a dog that's not conscious, that just does whatever it wants when it wants, right? If it wants to poop, it poops, right? Unless it's trained, which again, that's the ego, that's the morality, that's people telling you, you know, that's not good, don't do that, right? Instructing and everything, which is interesting to think about, right? Like how much of that is really necessary, and maybe it is necessary, or maybe it's not. We just don't, we just haven't figured out how to live, right? I think there are a lot of things that humanity hasn't really figured out what to do, like parenting, voting, governing, right? There's a lot of confusion right now, especially now in the world. So I thought that was an interesting idea, right? How morality and all of, obviously that causes resentment psychologically because you're not able to be your true self. So you need to find outlets to be who you really are, your animalistic side, right? But with limits, with balance, as they say, right? Being able to mitigate that so it's not so in people's face, right? And you're not disrespectful, offending other people, attacking, being aggressive, all these things, right? So yeah, I'm gonna make two other videos where I'm gonna be talking. The next one is on necessary evils. It's gonna be very interesting. And after that, I'm gonna be talking about my idea on voting and how I think it's not very well. I'm gonna be talking about some ideas there, which again I'm gonna be like discussing them in these monologues, and be on the lookout for a music video coming up. And that's all I got for this one. So I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace. Well, I think I'm gonna shut this off. So yeah, bye.